If you are the kind of important person at a big car company responsible for making executive saloons like this Mercedes C-Class, then you officially have What Cars sympathy, and that is for two reasons. First of all, the kind of person who buys this sort of car is, quite rightly, quite discerning and almost, dare we say, a little bit fussy. The second reason is that if you are one of those people buying one of these cars, you've got a whole host of cars to choose from. And in order to tempt people away from things like the BMW 3 Series, Audi A3 and A4, Jaguar XF, etc., etc., this car has to be quite good. There's no great secret that a lot of these C-Classes will be bought as company cars, and as diesels are still the engine of choice for company car buyers, it's also no real surprise that there are more diesels to choose from in the C-Class range than there are petrols. And this version, despite having a C200 badge on the boot, is actually a 1.6 litre diesel. You get low emissions, it's 102 grams per kilometre, averages just over 70 miles per gallon officially, but it's not the quickest of cars. It takes just under 10 seconds to get to 60, and you will be pushing it in order to get that. And the other diesels, if you step up just a little bit in the range, there is the C220 CDI, and this, as far as we're concerned, is the pick of the range. It's got the most all-round ability. It gets to 62 seconds quicker than this car does, in just under 8 seconds, and yet it still only emits 1 gram per kilometre more of CO2, so I think it's well worth the extra investment. What isn't really worth the extra investment is the C250, which adds a bit more power. It's a little bit quicker, especially through the mid-range, but it's not really worth the extra £1,000 or so. Manual gearboxes haven't really been Mercedes' forte in the past, but if you go for the basic versions and the smaller engine like this car, then that's what you're going to end up with. It's a 6-speed manual box. However, it's actually not that bad. It's pretty slick and precise, and it is much better than the ones they've had in the past. More often than not though, Mercedes come with automatic gearboxes, and that's where you get a standard on the C250 and as an option on the C220. It's a very clever system though. It links up with the sat-nav and it will prepare the right gear according to the corners or the hills that are coming up. Now, it's great out on the open roads. It's not quite as clever around town though, and it can get a little bit jerky there. And the new C-Class is much quieter than the previous car, which is great, although there is still a fair amount of noise that makes its way into the cabin when you're on the motorway. And the diesel engines are quite gruff and clattery, which doesn't really fit with a car of this class. Another area where the C-Class isn't quite up to scratch with its rivals is ride and handling. It's just not quite as much fun as the likes of the 3 Series or even the Audi A3 Saloon. As standard, you get steel sprung suspension, and that's fine out on country roads, etc., but around town and on worse road surfaces, it is just quite fidgety and uncomfortable. And if you go for the AMG line models, then that lowers the suspension by about 15mm, which naturally makes the ride a little bit firmer, but oddly doesn't improve body control. Things do improve if you go for the optional air suspension though. It's about 900 quid, but it is well worth it. If you put it in sport mode, then it is that bit more entertaining when you're going down country roads, etc. But when you're on the motorway, it's wonderfully comfortable. It's like riding in a much bigger, more expensive limousine. The only thing is, it doesn't quite deal with potholes perfectly, and they still send a bit of a jolt throughout the cabin. Now, up here is where the C-Class really excels. Not only does it set the standard for quality in this class, but it is also up to the standard of some much more expensive limos. All the switches, for example, feel really wonderfully well done, but still have a solid feel to them. And there are some really nice touches in this cabin, especially as you go up to the slightly higher trim levels. You get bullseye air vents and perforated metal speaker grills on those, for example, but even these ones feel and look fantastic. The cabin is light and airy with good visibility in almost all directions. And I say almost because there is the usual problem of over-shoulder visibility. There's quite a big C-pillar there. And one thing that goes some way to helping that is the fact that you get a standard reversing camera on every C-Class, which is brilliant. Now, the driving position in this car is absolutely fantastic. There is so much adjustment on this seat that you will be able to get comfy even if you're really rather tall. It just goes really far back. And the sports seats that you get on the higher level models are also really supportive and comfortable as well, so they're fantastic. The instruments up here are clear and easy to read, but another thing that you get in every C-Class is this 7-inch colour screen. It's not a touch screen, everything is controlled down here. You've got a dial, which will be familiar if you've got a Mercedes already. It works in much the same way, but you've also got a little touchpad that allows you to swipe, pinch and do things much in the same way as you do on a tablet or a smartphone. It's not quite as easy to use as something on a smartphone though, and it's a little bit clunky sometimes. So most of the time we'd end up using the dial because it's easier to use that without taking your eyes off the road. It is a good system, but it's not quite as simple as the one in the BMW 3 Series, for example. The iDrive in that is still the class leader for now. Now, because of all that adjustment in the front, there is plenty of room for people much taller than me, 6 foot plus, so you'll have loads of room up there. Things are not quite so generous in the back though. Headroom is okay when you're in, as you'll see, but it is getting in and out that's the problem. You've got to make sure you don't bang your head on this swooping roofline. Now, as I say, once you're in, headroom is decent for a pair of adults, and legroom is pretty good as well. Our measurements show that it is only slightly smaller than the BMW 3 Series. You are okay for 2 adults in here, but when it comes to getting a third one in, it is a little bit less generous. The seat itself is fine, it's just this big tunnel in the middle means you won't have quite so much in the way of legroom, so you will have drawn the short straw in the middle. If we move around to the boot, we see it's a decent size. At 480 litres, it's pretty much exactly the same as the one you'll get in the BMW 3 Series. Crucially though, you can get a set of these in widthways without too much in the way of trouble. Now, this is another reason not to go for the entry-level version, because on that version you don't get split folding rear seats like you do on all the other models. So, just have to take my word for it on that one. Now, if you're handing over a great big wad of cash, then the C-Class is pretty much the same price as the equivalent BMW 3 Series, but it is a little bit more expensive than the Audi A3 Saloon or Volvo S60. However, it is predicted to hold on to its value pretty well, so its lease rates, for example, will be very competitive. Now, another good thing is that CO2 emissions compare really well to all of those rivals, even on the automatic versions, so all the relevant taxes are kept nice and low. Now, even though you've got 70 miles per gallon official fuel economy, it's worth bearing in mind that in our real world test, the C220 CDI didn't do quite as well, got about 47 mpg. To see all of our true mpg tests, check out on the dedicated part of the website right here. The latest version of this car is naturally far too new to have appeared in any of our used customer satisfaction surveys so far, but Mercedes has good form in that area. The previous version of this car, for example, came 4th. It gets a good amount of safety kit as well. All C-Classes get 7 airbags as standard, but they also get a system that senses if you're about to crash and applies the brakes for you. As far as the rest of the equipment is concerned, every single car gets a good amount of kit. The basic model in the range is the SE, and this comes with 16-inch alloys, climate control, cruise control, a reversing camera, rain sensing wipers and a DAB digital radio. However, we would recommend you step up to sport trim, which costs an extra couple of grand, but it gets 17-inch alloy wheels, upgraded interior trims, heated sports front seats, front and rear parking sensors and those split folding rear seats. Top of the range is the AMG line, which costs a further 1.5 grand. It adds 18-inch wheels, an AMG body kit, leather trim on the dashboard, sports suspension and steering wheel mounted paddles on the automatic versions. As I said at the start, some buyers in this class really do want their car to be a little bit of everything, and if you're after something that is fun to drive, then to be honest, this probably isn't the one for you. The BMW 3 Series and Audi A3 do that a bit better than the C-Class. It gets a little bit better when you look at practicality and running costs, but where this car really shines is in that cabin. It also gets a high level of safety kit and a great level of equipment. It's not quite at the top of its class, but it is right up there. For more information, search for Mercedes C-Class on whatcar.com. But while you're here, keep up to date with all of our latest videos by clicking subscribe.